right. Thanks a lot. So you're gonna ask them how they can,
Yeah, how do you combine those practices? Yeah.
I do a little bit of work in Legos, and so I was, I haven't gotten a chance to look at your book, but I'm, looking forward to seeing what
Thank
you
you for
have to
reminding
say.
me. I shoved it over, well, actually, my long suffering husband schlepped it all the way over here.
But Lagos is one of the places where it's hard for most people to imagine any quote-unquote solution to the issues that isn't tied to big capital, And so, yeah, I'll be very interested to see what you have to say. Wow, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it was in combination with an exhibition.
Yeah, okay, now I can see.
Artworks
It's very,
artworks that also show the relationship of the Dutch to water.
right.
And I think that was not only for when the book came out, but also for later. It was such a wonderful combination because it gives it a whole other dimension than just the urban design and landscape story.
Wouldn't have, yeah. Great. So you and Ashley never actually met then?
No!
Wow.
We had a Skype interview.
Oh, okay.
So we've only seen each other through Skype, and
yeah,
then,
I had thought that you had actually met.
and then I said, well, why don't we meet when I'm in New York? And he said, oh, you're coming to New York, why don't you do a talk? And I said, great, love to. And we can meet then. And now, unfortunately, our plan
Well, he was really excited to give the intro, so he must be really quite sick.
Yeah, that is really too bad. Because had you heard that my host is down with the flu? Yeah.
But I guess, we should be grateful to him that he's not going to expose us to whatever he has in
Yes.
this building.
And you managed to get the live stream up and running again.
Yes, so
That's
we had an
great.
event on Friday and it was working now. So, I felt I should warn folks, after last week they said it wasn't working, that I should at least warn folks it might not work.
Yeah.
But in your case, it was the minute when I was wanting to ask you if you wanted to be live streamed that I found out that it wasn't working. So
Oh, geez.
that's why you got that weird combination request.
Okay, well,
But
I
it's
was
great
very
because
glad
it means
that,
you should be able to download it directly from the link, and but we will also eventually embed that link on the center site as well.
Oh, great.
So people will be able to access it through that as well.
Wonderful.
The assistants at the center are grad students, so they cycle to us year after year.
Oh, yeah.
So it'll take a little while before
So it's
our
something
current
different.
student has the tech knowledge to be able to do that, but it will happen at some point, and then I'll let you know.
Yeah, we have interns too for the talk show, and it always takes quite a while for them to get up to speed.
Yeah.
And then when they are, they know 10 times as much as I do.
Exactly.
I am going to step out to the ladies' room before I start. Is there one down here? Ray?
Yeah, it's right over to the right, yeah. Are you gonna speak too, or are you
No,
looking at all the Tracy?
Supporting services today.
How are we on time? It's not 15 minutes or so.
I have 6:25, but I tend to, my
Oh,
watch tends to run.
mine
ahead.
says 6:18, so.
Okay.
6:18.
You never know, of course, whether anybody will come.
You never know. You really don't. I'm sure someone will come. But whether the room will be overflowing or half full, I can't say. It's so unpredictable.
There was a big event going on upstairs. That looked like a great, exciting,
Big line.
In the auditorium
There was something
upstairs.
about plays by black women.
You know, there's so many events that especially when we're having an event, I don't even pay attention to what's going on in the building unless I'm able to attend. So I don't even know what's going on. Yeah, I'll probably see the sign on the way out. Yeah.
Oh, that was it, yeah.
Yeah. But there are lots of really great events that are curated from within the building. And then CUNY also rents the space out
Oh,
to
that
the
too.
private sphere.
Wow.
Which has caused interesting competition for us. So we no longer have access to the building on weekends because of that. But we do get the space free.
Counterproductive.
Oh, we are being live streamed right now, by the way, just in case you want to say anything controversial. But yeah, so I presume from the sound of that event, it sounds like it came from within. But I suppose it could be a rental event.
Yeah, there was a long line for the theater, really. And you could tell there's this wonderful atmosphere of anticipation.
Right, yeah. Yeah, oh, that's interesting. I'm not aware of that event happening, but as I said, there's so much going on that I often blind myself. If I see that there's a certain date and I know we're having an event, I'll bother to find out.
And your center is one of many here.
Our center is one of many, so we're one of many centers that, they're quite different from each other, both in their governance as well as what they do. But all of them have some kind of contribution to the academic workings of the Graduate Center, but they often have different mandates in terms of what they're doing besides that.
Oh.
So we run a yearly seminar for student and faculty fellows who get, faculty get teaching time off and students get funds to come together for the year around a certain theme. And it ends up being, they read for the first several weeks and then it becomes a writing group after that. So people share writing in whatever stage of readiness with others. So that's what we do for the internal academic bunch. And then the other thing we do is this public programming.
Great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good place.
I was surprised to see when Ashley sent me his contact info that he was a professor of English, since he called me about this whole water issue, and I thought, where does that connect? That's what I wanted to ask you this evening.
Well, I guess I'd say he comes out of the cultural studies tradition. So
okay.
Cultural studies folks often get jobs in lit crit and English, so he has a broader purview than
Okay.
simply language or literature.
Yeah. Oh.
So that would be my answer. I don't know what Ashley would tell you, but I would think it would be something like that.
And then people always ask me, as a journalist, how did you get into the water world?
Right?
Yeah.
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 Well, that's one thing about the center, is that we consider ourselves interdisciplinary. And if you look, Ashley's one of our, he's on our board. And if you look at our board, you have pretty cross-disciplinary, although we don't have any mathematicians or physicists on the board. But we have had mathematicians who have applied to be fellows. So that's actually a major achievement because, I mean, we're certainly, the bulk of us are social scientists.
And what do they do when they're here as fellows then?
Well, we had a mathematician apply last year. The topic was debt. And he wasn't doing, he wasn't doing like standard neoclassical economics, but he was interested in debt. Thinking about the mathematical lens, the technical lens of debt, as well as the sociological lens. So there are things.
Perfect.
There are overlaps.
Yeah. Oh, remember I asked you to change the title and you said, I'm sorry, I don't see what you mean. And then somebody had changed it.
Well, that's
don't
when
know
I
how that
realized that the
happened.
spacing,
There was- yeah,
it was only a spacing issue, but I
We
wasn't
run it
clear
together.
what you
No.
said.
And
yeah.
because the semicolon was missing at the end, it looked like salt water.
Oh, that's interesting.
So
though. I
they were
didn't
too
change
tiny.
that.
Well, somebody did.
It would have only been me.
Hi.
So the only spacing issue I was able to discover was that, because
Yeah.
the blog has a mind of its own, so even if you put it in right, it may not show up right. So
Oh.
maybe when I changed that, somehow that also changed.
Okay. and
Or
all
at
of a
least
sudden-
what I was viewing, or maybe it was the browser that you were viewing it through. It's I mean, these blogs,
Frustrating.
they're designed to be user-friendly, but
My
especially
website
with
is on
text,
WordPress, but it has a
This is
mind
WordPress.
of its own. It
This
drives
is
me
WordPress
crazy.
as well.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that it's WordPress, but it's hosted through a CUNY system that's also being
Another
updated.
filter.
So there's another layer. It's horrible. But I'm glad that it worked out because I did, I said I could please
Yeah.
explain what you mean, and
Yeah.
then I said it's got to be the spacing around the end.
Yeah, and
But I swear I didn't do anything with water in the Dutch. Yeah, I don't know,
Oh,
but I'm glad it worked out. So the colon was missing.
yes, sweet, because when you write it full out, you're right. Sweet and salt, colon, water.
Right, of course, yeah. Huh. Well, I'm glad it worked out.
Oh, yeah.
When I didn't hear back from you, I figured it must have been that.
Yeah, I was so
issue,
surprised.
yeah.
I thought, gee, this is a lovely case of auto repair. We like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it worked out.
Hello there.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm the same person who said hello to before.
That's right. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm studying Dutch, so anything about Dutch.
You're studying Dutch?
Yes. and
What possesses you?
I'm probably the only American studying Dutch,
That's
right?
why.
Well, I lived in Berlin, oh my God, how many years ago? 10 years ago. And I went a lot to Amsterdam, and I know a lot of people now. And so, I don't know, I'm just fascinated with the whole culture. I only wish that the Dutch weren't absorbed by the English and, we would be speaking Dutch and would have a mentality Dutch. We got stuck with this Victorian England nonsense here that I have to deal with. Oh. So that's, I guess I'm a Dutch wannabe.
And have you been to the Netherlands to practice?
Yeah. But I go through stages. When I came back from Germany, I took a Dutch class, so then I had like a low beginner, but since I haven't been keeping up on it, but now I'm trying to force myself into training, studying, like that.
And the
Should you be
hard part
saying
is-
this in Dutch?
What's that?
Shouldn't you be saying this in Dutch?
Well, actually,
Ik kan dat niet praten, maar...
gaat heel goed.
Are you Dutch?
No, but I live there. Well, I now am a dual national.
See
My
that?
husband is Dutch.
I'm down.
Oh. You have that Dutch look, but I wouldn't want to stereotype you.
Well, I'm not tall enough, actually. All the Dutch women are now so tall. Good evening.
Oh, dual citizenship. Very good.
But the hard part about practicing in the Netherlands is that everyone,
I know.
especially in the city, speaks English, and they immediately switch to English.
Yeah.
It's so hard to learn. It really is. You have to be so persistent.
They love it when you try.
They do.
And it's my life goal because I teach French and Spanish, so if I can learn Dutch, German, and Italian before croaking from this earth, I'll be happy.
You'll have definitely achieved something.
I went to a polyglot, the International Polyglot Conference 2 weeks ago in New York. And I met people from around the world. I mean, these people in that conference were speaking 7 or 10 languages. It was amazing.
What's this?
What's the squeaking sound?
It may be something that happens from time to time, it's just the tech system. And it's idiosyncrasies.
So
Let's
we
hope
ignore it,
doesn't-
basically.
Yeah, we ignore it. Let's hope it doesn't act up or
It's hard to find this because the sign out there says something else before you put the photocopy. There's a-
Exactly. Yeah. But it would seem that the electronic signing completely has a mind of its own.
Oh.
Well, it's just already advertising tomorrow, so
Uh,
probably yesterday it advertised.
Except I wasn't here to see it, that's too
That's
bad.
why we
Yeah.
always put paper signs up. In addition. So at 6:29, I think we should probably give another 3 to 5 minutes.
Sure.
Try to get critical mass.
Yeah.
Right.
And what about you here? You got your mic on. Uh-huh. Okay. And yourself, sir?
Hi,
Hi, I'm Tracy.
I'm Marcel.
Hello, Marcio.
I come from a city which is under the water in Brazil. It's called Recife. And the Dutch,
Recife? Yes.
the Dutch has been there.
Yes, for the slave trade.
In the 17th century.
Not to the Dutch glory, but
Yeah. They did okay. I mean, in terms of they were doing like sugarcane trade. Right?
Yeah. So
The
you
urban development that they left is
Yeah.
it's quite a reference even today.
And at least being modest, he's
Tracy's-
also an urbanist.
The traces of the streets, you know, it's still there.
uh-huh. Have you been to the Netherlands?
Oh, a long time ago, 20 years ago.
Uh-huh. We all have our coats with us, we may be needing them.
No, it's really cold in here.
Well, it snowed in upstate New York yesterday.
You're kidding.
No, in Connecticut.
It snowed.
In Vermont, they opened the first ski resort.
Yeah, it snowed in Toronto as well. Wow. I mean, that's at least a little more.
I'm not ready for that
I'm not ready for that. Mentally completely
Have to be ready
unprepared.
for anything these days.
Well, 2 years in a row in New Jersey, I teach in the Jersey suburbs, they canceled Halloween. First it was an ice storm, then it was a snowstorm, 2 years in a row. So. okay. But yet it's gonna be like 70 degrees tomorrow and 75 on Thursday. That's New York weather for you.
Crazy, crazy.
You're not from New York?
No, originally from California.
Oh, okay. Do you live in New York now?
No, I live in Amsterdam.
Oh, you do live in New York?
Yes.
California's having its own difficulties. Drought followed by flood.
Oh, those
Yeah.
muds, what about those mudslides? Just engulfs whole roads and cars and houses, it's like.
Yeah, everything's so dried out inside, when it does start to rain, it's just all,
Oh, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Sucked up.
well, if only it did get sucked up. Rain, it's just that earth is so hard and compact, it can't soak anything up anymore, it just slides away. Wow.
Switch cards.
Well, I'm gonna read Ashley's introduction, so we can start with that in a minute or so.
Okay.
That'll give a little more time to Where's the rest of your class?
I don't know. Honestly.
Was the whole class supposed to come?
No, we were supposed to find
Oh, okay, so you selected this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi. Hi.
Thank you for joining the crowd.
Expecting one more who's running late.
Oh, good. Let me go ahead and pass the book around, which was the origin of this talk. You can have a look, and I'm sure you'll recognize some things, but since that came out, a lot has happened. This is a very dynamic field, and it's just getting more and more topical and more interesting. It's really, unfortunately, more topical, as we were just saying. In California.
Seawater Rise.
And what brought you here?
General interest in ecology and changing cities. Yeah, I do urban sociology. Nothing particularly connected to more environmental sociology, although I'm interested in that. Great. Heard a lot about water and the Dutch, so yeah, I'm eager to see
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for
keep
joining.
me up to date.
Yeah. It's actually very strange, of course, that an American should be here to tell other Americans about how the Dutch are going about a new kind of protection of the country from water. But I've lived there for 35 years now. And I'm very interested in really in all the issues that impact our relationship to our surroundings. Built surroundings, but also nature. What are the cultural values that determine how you decide what you're going to do with the space that you have at your disposal? And since in the Netherlands space is so scarce, those decisions are very urgent and direct. And also, especially dealing with water, since so much of the country is below sea level. And dealing with water is just a matter of survival for the Dutch. So it becomes a really urgent issue. And the way they go about it is very different from the American way. So, especially since Sandy and Katrina, everyone's looking to the Dutch for answers. But the whole governance, the whole mentality is really quite different. So you can buy the technology, but you can't buy the mentality.
So why don't I go ahead and introduce you?
Okay.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. My name is Mary Taylor. I'm the Assistant Director here of the Center for Place, Culture and Politics, and we're really pleased to have Tracy Metz here today to speak about her book. The reason why Tracy is here is because one of our board members, Ashley Dawson, familiarized himself with her work, and they met via Skype apparently. And when she let him know she was going to be in town around these days, he suggested that she give a talk at the center. So Ashley was the natural person to invite to introduce Tracy today, but unfortunately he found himself very ill this morning. But he was so excited about Tracy coming that he actually had penned an introduction. So I've decided that rather than pushing his introduction aside, I'll channel Ashley here tonight, and therefore he gets to participate in the thing that he set in motion. So from here on out, I'm Ashley. Cities are the defining ecological phenomenon of the 21st century. They house the majority of humanity. They contribute the lion's share of carbon to the atmosphere, and they are peculiarly vulnerable to climate chaos. Coastal cities like Dhaka, Lagos, and Jakarta are growing particularly quickly. Today, over half of the world's population lives within 120 miles of the sea. By 2025, it is estimated that this figure will reach 75%. It is in such cities that the strongest effects of climate change will be felt. How will humanity cope with combined threats such as sea level rise, storm surges, and intensifying extreme weather that impact such coastal cities? No one has as much experience in coping with flooding as the Dutch. For centuries, the Dutch have been experimenting with technologies like the polder that help keep their below sea level nation dry. They have also developed institutions of governance, from the local water boards to an enviably efficient nation state, that have allowed them to cope with the challenges represented by flooding. Today, they are experimenting with inventive new approaches to living with water that radically reconfigured established models of humanity's relationship to fluid topographies. Some of these experiments have already shaped plans to build resilience in New York following Hurricane Sandy. For example, plans to help Hoboken cope with future flooding through a strategy called Resist, Delay, Store, and Discharge are clearly modeled on experiments undertaken in Rotterdam over the last decade. Some Dutch planners such as, and I'll mispronounce this name, Koen Olthuis, is that okay? You want to say it?
Koen Althuis.
Koen Althuis of the Architecture Forum Water Studio are proposing even more visionary solutions to sea level rise, including amphibious housing and portable islands. The Dutch approach to living with water clearly offers incredibly timely lessons for an urban world threatened by climate change. I, Ashley, can think of no one better suited to explore Holland's evolving relationship to water than Tracy Metz. Tracy is a journalist and author of many books, including the brilliant Sweet and Salt, Water and the Dutch, which we're handing around here. In addition to her work as a writer, Tracy is director of the John Adams Institute, the Center of American Culture in the Netherlands. And she has her own monthly live talk show, Stadsleven, about living in cities. I regret that illness has prevented me from attending Tracy's talk in person, since I am sure that a presentation will offer many fascinating insights about the Dutch relationship to water. I hope that you will offer Tracy a warm welcome. So let's begin with a warm welcome for Tracy.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Ashley. Hello, welcome. Okay. To the ladies behind you. So I want to give you an idea of the different mentality of the Dutch to dealing with water, and perhaps what America can learn from the Netherlands, but also what the Netherlands has learned from America, because there are lessons back and forth. The book that we're handing around, as I told Mary in the beginning, was both a story about the redesign of the landscape and cities, but also an exhibition of artworks that say something about the relationship of the Dutch to water. And I wanted to start my talk this evening, which will be divided into a couple parts, with some images that will show you how intimate the relationship is between Dutch and that watery landscape that they live in the delta in northwestern Europe. I'll talk about some of the traditions the Dutch have of dealing with water, then some new strategies for urban areas, some new strategies for the larger landscape, and then I'll finish up with a couple, because we all love that, business opportunities, because climate change is, of course, in many ways a very bad and dangerous thing. But it creates all sorts of new urgencies and new questions, and therefore new answers, and therefore also new business opportunities. And I think that's one of the arguments that works best in the US, saying that maybe we can save money by investing beforehand in protection rather than throwing money at damage after the fact. You know, Congress voted, what was it, $65 billion for repair after Sandy. And you have to wonder, what could we have, how much would it have cost to have prevented that, and how much suffering could we have prevented if we'd invested beforehand? But as I said, that's part of the difference in mentality between the Dutch and the Americans. And that's something that none of us will be able to change overnight, and maybe never will, but I think it's still worthwhile to hear how other people go about this. Here are a few of those images of how important water is in the Dutch landscape. These are lakes in the west of the country where in the 15th, 16th century, the Dutch dug out peat, which they used as fuel. And they would dig out these long strips of peat and throw them onto these grassy strips to dry. So you get this landscape, which especially from the air, looks like some kind of board game. I think it's really beautiful and very, very typical Dutch. Moving now towards the harbor in Rotterdam. And also an extremely recognizable Dutch landscape, these drainage ditches that divide the landscape up into this very well-organized geometry. Just to get you oriented, here on the left we see a map of Europe, so you see where the Netherlands are, and here on the right, the Netherlands zoomed out, Amsterdam more or less in the middle. And I think this is a really interesting map of the Netherlands. If you compare it to this, and then to that, you see how much of the country is prone to flooding. Without this tremendously complex system of dikes and pumps that the Dutch have developed through the centuries, basically a third of the country would be underwater. And given the fact that now a third of the gross national product is earned in the west of the country, you see what I mean when I say that dealing with water really is a matter of simple survival for the Dutch. And also, at least half the country's population lives in the same low-lying area, which would be flooded if we didn't have this elaborate protection system. Well, you'll hear as I talk that sometimes I say we, sometimes I say them. It's hard to predict which is which, but as I mentioned at the beginning, I am originally American. I come from California, which now, of course, has its own extreme water issues. I went to Holland after college. The cheapest ticket to Europe after college that day was a ticket to Amsterdam. I immediately fell in love with the city, and after a while ended up staying and have now built my life there, and I've lived there now for 35 years, which I find incredible. But the calendar says it's true. And I've become very interested in issues of how we relate to the space that we have and how we make the decisions that we make about how to use that space. And of course, water is one of the defining issues in the Netherlands. The oldest way that the Dutch had of protecting habitation from water was palisades, which of course is probably the most simple and primitive way. And this worked fairly well for a while until this character came in, this worm, and started eating all the palisades. And that's why you see here the palisades become completely crumbling apart. And this was the first example of managed retreat that the Dutch had to do because of water, because the palisades were simply eaten up by these worms. The next best known traditional strategy was building on mounds. So even if the whole landscape was covered by water, the churches or the villages or the farms that were on the mounds would still be able to stay dry until the water subsided. It's a very simple strategy, but very efficient. And of course, the other best known strategy is building dikes or levees, which is pretty much the same thing. And I think these levees in the Netherlands are really interesting presences in the landscape. They really shape our perception of the landscape. They're one of the few places where you get some height, because the Netherlands are so flat. And you always look across the flat land to the horizon. And that's why the dikes are a special place, because they give you an elevation and a way of looking out over the landscape, which you really can't get from anywhere else except perhaps in the top of a church tower. And I love this image because I think it really shows you how serious a dike is. This man is pedaling along on a sunny Sunday afternoon at the height of these people's roofs. So I think you can imagine if the dikes were to fall apart, what that would mean for the landscape behind. That would mean, well, water higher than this room above our heads. And the dikes are very, how should I say, they're almost emotional presences in the landscape, because they're full of stories. Everyone has a relationship to the dike of their childhood. And I love this image where you see the very modern landscape of the harbor and the wind turbines in the distance, and in the front, the very basic, fundamental, classical Dutch landscape of the dikes. This is an American dike. This is a completely different kind of thing. Dikes were really the basis of the Dutch collective approach to water safety. If a bunch of farmers band together and they build a dike together, if I maintain my piece and you don't maintain yours, the dike will still break. You can't, each dike is a chain which is as strong as its weakest part. So that means that everyone has to pitch in, everyone has to work together to keep this system whole and functioning. This is different. This is a farmer in the Mississippi, in Vicksburg, who, when the Mississippi was flooding, decided that he was not going to wait for any sort of collective approach. He was going to protect his own farm, and then he got his bulldozer out and he built his own dike. And I think this really shows the antithesis between the Dutch collective approach and the American each man for himself approach. And I think as far as the Dutch is concerned, the each man for himself will never work. This is something that we really have to do together. And we have a collective system of financing through taxes. It's actually in the Dutch constitution. The government is obliged to keep the country habitable by keeping it dry. And there's a separate ministry of the government which is in charge of the dikes and the roads and all the infrastructure. Hello, welcome, hi. So I really like this image because the contrast is so great. Flood protection can be super, super high-tech. I'll show you some images of that, but it can also be really simple. And I like these simple images because it shows how closely related flood protection is to daily life for the Dutch. This is a town near Rotterdam, where the main street is one of the oldest streets in the Netherlands and very difficult to elevate. So what do? When the river is full and the city threatens to flood, the volunteers that you see here in their jackets come out and put these poles in the street, and sometimes in front of the doors of the houses and the shops, and they just make this simple pile of planks which keeps the water out, or at least the majority of it, until the flooding subsides, and then they take them away again. And I like this. I think this is a very old way of doing something new, which is the new strategy of the Dutch. More flexibility. Sometimes the place is dry, sometimes it's wet, and you can act accordingly. And this place is normally dry, sometimes it's wet, you put in these planks. Also in another town along the river, the IJssel. This is the medieval walls of the city. And to protect the city behind it, they did basically the same thing. You just slot in these aluminum planks. And it's, hello, welcome, hi. And it's very simple, and these are also volunteers. They're called the High Water Brigade. And it's like a volunteer fire department. When the floods are coming, they know a day or two beforehand, and they call the High Water Brigade, and they come out and do their heroic water defense thing. And then when it's all over, you just take the planks out and put them away again. The logo of the Netherlands, of course, these are actually pumps. 16th, 17th century pumps. These are windmills that were used to pump water out of reclaimed areas and pump it into often the circular body of water surrounding that reclaimed area. So when you see new land in the Netherlands, that is actually the bottom of the river or the sea that was reclaimed by building a dike around it and then pumping the water out originally with these water mills. So, hi.
Sorry.
Wrong one? Okay. And of course, these are now historical monuments. These aren't used anymore for pumping water, but they still are such water, tulips, cheese. They're one of the logos of the Netherlands. This is, I think, a clear image of what a polder actually is. You build a dike, like here. This is the bottom of the reclaimed area on which you can then, for example, farm or build housing. And then the windmills, or now the electric pumps, pump the water out to the higher area around. It looks very simple. It's actually an extremely complex system, but the principle is clear. If there are any questions, please just let me know. Yes, please.
Why aren't the windmills used? I mean, it seems like it's wind power as opposed to fuel to run the electricity.
Perhaps the time will come that they go back to wind power.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. But everything is now focused on, the whole system is now electrified. And the windmills that we have are all, really 150-meter tall wind turbines.
oh,
Yeah, so I must say the Netherlands is a real laggard in terms of sustainable wind energy. I think it's scandalous. Only 4% of the national energy comes from renewable energy like wind and sun. In Germany, it's 25%. And one of the Dutch strategies for living with water was simply to live on the water. Even the cows lived on the water. Until the 50s, you had farmers who had to pick up their cows a couple times a day and move them to another pasture by boat, which the cows probably didn't like very much, but it was simply economic necessity. This doesn't happen anymore because farms have gotten much bigger in order to be economically viable. But I love this image of cows sailing down this peaceful little canal. The Dutch also use water to defend themselves. This is a line of defenses. All those little black dots are forts, and the water outside, and the fields outside the forts could be flooded when the enemy was on his way. And the idea was that you would have this ring. This one is around Amsterdam, as you can see, and that these inundation fields would protect the urban areas from the enemy. Unfortunately, I think this was a brilliant idea, and it's a beautiful presence in the landscape. Unfortunately, it was a little too late because they had just barely finished this whole ring of defenses when someone invented gunpowder. And then you didn't have to come close in order to breach this line of defense. You could simply shoot off a cannonball, and that would breach the dikes. Or what also happened was that they did flood the fields outside this line of defense, and then it froze. And then the enemy could just walk in. So it was quite a complex, and I think very well thought out system, but ultimately it never really functioned the way it was thought. But the idea of using water as a form of defense, I think, is also one of the bright Dutch innovations of 2 centuries ago. It doesn't always work. Flooding is really, just as much as defense against flooding, flooding is really part of the Dutch tradition and has been for centuries. There are a whole series of major floods with major damage, and there are any number of handsome artworks, etchings and paintings that depict these epic floods. So it's not like the Dutch have completely fixed all of this. And this is, we were just talking now about dikes that can dry out when it's too hot. Mudslides in California now. This is basically the same thing. This is a dike which dried out in the summer of 2003 when it was very hot. And then without anyone having any warning, the dike just cracked in the middle of the night. And you can see this used to be a full canal of water with the boats, and everything just got sucked into this crack into the lower lying neighborhood behind it. And it was a very small, and this is not a national disaster by any means, but it still created 12 million euros of damage and a lot of aggravation for the people who live there. And of course, height differences like this dike on the right can sometimes be a danger if you're not paying attention or maybe had a drink too many on the way home. This is another dike in the Netherlands, a beautiful, strong element in the landscape called the enclosure dike. Amsterdam, if I go back, you can see that Amsterdam is close to this big body of water, and the enclosure dike is up here because the tides from the sea and the storms meant that Amsterdam and the city of Leiden, a number of cities around this big body of water, really suffered from flooding. They called it the water wolf, a beautiful poetic name. But this was so much trouble for the Netherlands that they decided to close this body of water off with a 32 kilometer, about 20 mile long dike. And it's really one of the Dutch experiences to drive or bicycle over this dike and see and realize that on the one hand, the water is sweet, fresh, as I call it in my book, and the other side is salt. And also when it freezes over, when it's certain light, you can tell the color difference between the side that is fresh and the side that is salt. And this strong, straight line through the water is, I think, one of the really prototypical Dutch water sensations. In 1953, that was probably the biggest flood in human history. It was a traumatic event. 1,800 people were killed in one night. The country was still reeling from the Second World War. It was very poor. This flood took place in the lower southwest of the country, which was a very isolated, poor, agrarian area. It was a combination of spring tide and storm, and the water just pushed in without any notice. People couldn't evacuate in time. 1,800 dead, hundreds of thousands of people who had to leave their homes. 1 million animals were drowned. And of course, for farmers, their animals, that's their capital. So this was a huge impact on a part of the country that was already weak after the war. I thought this image of the dead animals, realizing what this meant to these farmers was really it was traumatic. And there was an outpouring of sympathy all over the country, even though everything was still rationed after the Second World War in '53. People sent blankets and toys, and actually this image, was on the cover of the French magazine Paris Match, because there was such an outpouring of interest all over Europe in the poor Dutch and the water that had betrayed the Dutch after all these centuries of flood defense. And the floods are not really a thing of the past. This was 1993, 1995, and these are floods of the big rivers. And I remember that the Dutch were sort of taken aback. What? The river's flooding? Wait a minute, the danger is supposed to come from the sea, from the west, and the rivers come from the east, from the European hinterland. And they were almost shocked that the situation could be so bad in the rivers that something like this could happen. And it's been a great lesson for the future, as I'll show you further on down. This, I thought, also thinking back to the animals in the flood of 1953, this is half a century later, and these people are bringing their pets to the local church to keep them safe during the flooding that I just showed you. Dutch water safety has become more and more high-tech, more and more hard-nosed technology, more and more concrete, more and more set in stone, literally. These are sluices that separate sweet water from salt. They're an amazing feat of technology. I've been there, I thought I had to see this up close for this book, and it is just amazing. The ships come into the sluices, and then if they come from the side of the salt water, then all the salt water is sucked out of the sluices on one side, and the fresh water comes in from the top, and there are these huge basins. It's really impressive. But it's also an expression of the mastery over water, of dominion, of conquering water is the enemy. And I think that for a long time was the mentality, but that is changing, and that's really what I want to tell you about this evening. And why is it changing? Two main reasons. The climate is changing, and this is an image from Sandy, of course, from the Rockaways. This is an image from close to here in New Jersey. Also Sandy, the taxi parking lot where all of a sudden the taxis were floating rather than being parked. So, too much water, an image from Edward Burtynsky, the American photographer, who did a magnificent project on water all over the world. So too much water, but also too little water. This is a photo from my own home state of California. And I thought, gee, no dogs on the beach, no lifeguard on duty. That means that at one point there was water here if there was a lifeguard needed. But that time has apparently passed. And this is a housing development near Salton Sea in California, which of course is one of the best known places for just where the drought is the worst in human memory. Why would you build there? So the Dutch are now trying to find new ways to deal with water. And I showed you in the beginning the image of the mound with a church on it. This is a new kind of mound. The Dutch are giving old strategies new life. And this is, this used to be, this, say, lens-shaped area up here was new land, was a polder for farming. And there was a dike on both sides. And here you can see that the dike has been removed or lowered. So now actually the Dutch are trying to attain more safety by lowering the dikes rather than raising them higher and higher. The idea is that if you lower the dikes, when the river is too full, the water will be able to come in and then recede again rather than uncontrolled flooding. So it's a controlled spillway. And the farmers have moved from all over this area to these new mounds down here, which you see here in what was still then an artist's impression. And the idea is that if the farmers are up high on the mounds, they can continue to farm, they won't have any damage, and the land around them can flood and then fall dry again as the water level changes. We're also bringing water back into our cities. This is it's called the Elandsgracht, and a gracht is a canal. But as you can see, the canal has made way for parking. The car has driven the water out of the city. And more cities are thinking, we need our water back. And you see all sorts of attempts, and I'll show you two. This is a redesign of this same street, building the water back into the city with a parking garage underneath. This is a modern kind of redesign with water. And here's another one in the city of Seoul in Korea. The city had a major river running through it, but they decided to pave it over, make way for, again, parking. But the city realized that having this water in the center of the city would create such a wonderful place, bring people back, create a softer place in the city, a place where people could meet each other. And in Seoul, apparently, this has really worked very well. And you see how completely urban the surroundings are, but this water is still a natural, softer place in the city that really does bring people together. Remember I told you about that line of forts, the water line, it's called? Just last week, a museum was opened for it. And I thought that was interesting that the Dutch are now rediscovering their own water tradition, and for the first time are building a museum to commemorate this tradition of water defense. And actually you can see that whole structure running down the middle of the museum. And I wanted to show you this because it is so new, and I think it's a great witness of how the Dutch are rediscovering their tradition and giving it a new twist. This is one of the forts around that same system, and this too has been completely redesigned to make it a place where people can come and sit on the weekend and children play on these steps. And this is a cafe and a meeting place, and giving these water places new life, I think, is really the story of what's going on right now. This is a highway viaduct. It used to be a really unpleasant place, a place that you would not go for fun and that you would want to leave as soon as you possibly could. It's been completely transformed by adding a supermarket, a flower shop, a graffiti place where kids could practice their graffiti talents, and this place for water polo and kayaking. Who would ever have thought 10 years ago that under a highway there would be a place where people would actually come to be together, to do fun things together? It's a really innovative way of looking at the way we use space, and I think this one really came alive because we're using it with water. Another example in the urban setting of urban design with water. Normally this is a stretch of water from Rotterdam Central Station into town, and it has two sidewalks. It has this red brick sidewalk here, but it also has a red brick sidewalk here along the benches. But it's been raining a lot, the waterway is filled in, and here the water can simply rise, and you can still continue to use the street, you just take the higher sidewalk. And I thought this was a wonderful example of making places flexible. Sometimes they're wet, sometimes they're dry, and the urban design is creating this flexibility so that the city is resilient and suffers less from flooding. And I was really intrigued by this bridge. So I went to the urban designer of Rotterdam and I said, well, what happened with the bridge? I guess you guys made a mistake. And he said, no, it's not a mistake. This is intentional. We wanted this bridge to stop in the middle of the water when the water is high. And it makes people realize, oh, places can change character. Sometimes it's wet, sometimes it's dry. And using the urban design also to create awareness of what water can do to change our surroundings. This is also an example in Rotterdam. I think we all know, I know New York certainly knows this problem of increased cloudbursts. As the climate changes, it starts to rain harder and harder. The rain comes crashing down into the sewer and then it comes crashing out again. And all this really yucky water is on the streets. Combined sewer overflow, it's called. This is something that cities all over the world are having to face now. So the Dutch have developed a solution called water squares. The idea is that these squares, which are like basins, the basins catch the water from the whole neighborhood, it's funneled into these squares, and then it simply waits and then gradually seeps down either into the groundwater or into the sewer. And by creating spaces for water, you can create a more beautiful city. And I think this win-win situation of improving public space and improving water safety is something that the Dutch are really, really working hard to create. Floating housing, another option which has not really taken off yet in the Netherlands. It may, but I think this is a very handsome example of how you can also live with water, not herding your cows on the water anymore, but living on the water. And here are a couple examples of how architects are seeing new chances in this building with water. This on the left is a new project which hasn't been built yet, but it's actually a very old typology, isn't it? A house with a boathouse. But they're finding new manifestations of this in architecture now. And this project on the right has been built. Friends of mine live here. And everyone has a little, the houses go straight down into the water, and there's a little pier on the back. And if you like having a boat, everyone can have their own boat and mess around with the boats, as Winnie the Pooh used to call it. Another example of architecture discovering the potential of water. This is an area in the southwest of the country where that great flood of 1953 took place. This is a new visitor center. And the fact that this is a place that you can actually visit, that you would want to visit, and that there's architecture completely devoted to the character of that place, I think tells us a lot about how the country is changing. This is public space along the coast near The Hague, moving on to the larger scale, not just inside the city, but also along the coasts. Here you see that a big sea dike has been incorporated into a new boulevard. So the public space has been improved. It's, you see that there are people out there all the time, playing, skateboarding, sitting, chatting, going to the beach, having an ice cream. And actually this boulevard is covering this huge new sea dike. So here again you see the combination of an improved public space with improved water safety. The Dutch beaches have to be replenished every year because the North Sea batters the coast and takes away the sand. But that means that every year you send out the bulldozers, it's expensive, you destroy the beach ecology every year again. So the Dutch engineers have this idea, why don't we try to do something that is a longer term solution? And this is a so-called sand engine. It's basically a huge pile of sand dumped in front of the coast. And the idea is that nature will pick up this sand and distribute it along the coast as need arises. What I haven't figured out yet is how the tides and the currents know which places need that sand. So it's an experiment for 20 years, and it's a really interesting place because as you see the tides and the currents pass by there all the time, and every time you go there, the size of the place has changed. Gradually this bulge will just disappear. And there are new migratory birds that come to nest there. There are new plants. The place changes shape each time, and I've heard that this is also a fantastic place for surfing, one of the best along the European coast. And this is an interesting project that won an architecture prize. So I think that I'm particularly interested in architecture and the fact that architects see in this whole new water thinking a new opportunity. And this is a dike in a dune and a garage in the dike. So you see the car driving into the garage, which is inside the dune, and having that big bit of concrete. Hello there. Having that substantial bit of concrete inside the dune is also a way of strengthening the dune. So here again, you see that they're using water safety to create new places, and this has been very good for this beach town because the beach, they didn't know where to leave all the cars. So the cars were suffocating the town, and now the garage is used to strengthen the dune and to liberate the town from all these parked cars. Excuse me, back again. This is very near, Governor's Island. Have any of you been there? Yeah. And it's been redesigned by a Dutch firm called West 8. And he has designed it in such a way that the middle part of the island has these tall hills, which he calls climate hills. The idea is that the island is being refurbished in such a way that when the sea level rises, the island will still be able to be used and will be a more interesting place because of it. So here again you see using climate issues and redesign to create a safer and more attractive place. This top image was actually taken by the designer himself about 2 months ago, and this is an artist's impression of what it will ultimately look like. Moving now to the final images of my talk, the more utopian images, maybe some would say really, really crazy images. This is something that Rotterdam is working on right now called the wind wheel. The idea is to create wind energy and also create a new landmark for the city, along with apartments and a hotel and a restaurant, of course, in the top. It's being investigated very seriously. I don't know if I can promise you that it'll be there next time you visit the Netherlands, but just the fact that we're thinking about this new kind of water-driven landmarks, I think says a lot about the new Dutch approach to dealing with water. As people's imagination starts to run wild, you see that they're developing more floating cities. This was a design by a Dutch firm, Delta Sync. And these are a couple of designs made for the Silicon Valley billionaires who have decided that they would rather live off-sea, outside the coastal zone, and they call this movement seasteading. You know, I think parallel to the American homesteading movement when the West was colonized, and if you could farm 25 acres, it was yours. And now we're not homesteading, we're seasteading. So these billionaires who would really like to escape all the rules and regulations that we thought of for each other, they now have a movement to move out to sea and live on these floating islands or floating cities. This is another one of the competition. The seasteading initiatives had a competition. And on the site, if you look at seasteading, you can see all these, I mean, they're really, the one idea is crazier than the next, but it's very inspiring at the same time. And this is one of the ideas developed for the seasteading. This is a final image of floating nature. I mean, if everything floats, floating houses, floating cities, why should nature also not float? This is a design, Mary mentioned Koen Oldhuis. He's made several designs for floating mosques and islands and parking garages, and his newest design is for floating nature. Then just two final images. I promised to say something about the business opportunities that climate change is bringing, perhaps the only good thing about climate change. This is the birth of a new potato, cultivated in the Netherlands. And as the climate changes and the salt water pushes against the coast, all over the world, agricultural land is becoming unusable because it's too salty. Most crops can't grow in salty ground, including potatoes. But not this one. This one was especially designed and cultivated to grow in salty ground, to be irrigated with salt water from the ocean, and in salty air. And the whole point of this potato is that the potato itself isn't salty. All the salt is caught by the leaves. So you don't get all this extra salt, which you don't want in your diet. So the man in the green t-shirt is the potato trader, and he has come to this island in the north of the Netherlands where this potato was grown, and he's tasting the potato to see if it will be allowed into the international potato trade. And it was. And I think this is a significant Dutch contribution to fighting world hunger, because all over the world you see researchers looking for saline-resistant crops, rice and also potatoes. So this is part of a worldwide trend to try to continue to feed the world's population, which is growing, while climate change is taking away more and more of our agricultural land. And finally, I think we all recognize this guy, Bill Gates, who is really working hard, I think, with all his billions to make the world a better place. And what he's drinking here is a glass of water that has just been reclaimed from poop. And the Dutch too, but also the Americans. I think everyone with any research capacity is looking into the business opportunities of water waste management and recycling dirty water into clean water that can be used for industry or for agriculture or even for drinking water. And I think it was a very significant moment that someone like Gates would say, this is safe, I'm going to do it, watch me do it. And since he is, of course, an excellent businessman, I think he's more than aware that wastewater management is also a great source of business opportunities. So this is what I wanted to leave you with, the collective mentality of the Dutch, this win-win approach to using water safety to make our cities and our coasts better places, and that ultimately, hopefully, we will not only suffer from climate change, but we'll also be able to turn this around and make a business opportunity out of doing so. So that's what I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much. Any questions?
So have the Americans hired Dutch to look into more ways of preventing flooding after Sandy?
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
uh,
yeah. There are Dutch consultants really all over the world. The Dutch earn,
But specifically in New York, they really
Oh,
made an
yeah.
effort to
Oh,
do
yeah.
that.
and there was the,
Because some of the things beforehand were just stupid and ridiculous that were never looked at and analyzed while we had half of that flooding.
Yeah.
Right?
and on the Rebuild by Design competition, of the 10 winning teams, there were Dutch people involved in 6 of those teams. And there are many Dutch water companies, building companies that have come here, certainly as consultants. When it actually comes to getting the commissions, it's hard because the Americans would prefer to give those commissions to American companies. So the Dutch complain about that. But there's been a lot of research done and certainly a lot of consulting here and in New Orleans.
And then in Hoboken, you said they're doing a lot too?
Yeah, Hoboken was part of the Rebuild by Design competition. And
Because that place, even during a minor rainstorm,
is already suffering. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, they really had some repairs to be done even before Sandy, yeah. And I remember hearing the mayor of Hoboken speak at a conference in the Netherlands, and she said, you know how crazy our system is. I can get money to elevate the fire station so that the fire trucks are safe, but I can't get money to elevate the streets that the fire trucks have to drive on to go out and help people when something happens. So it's been a very frustrating experience for a lot of officials.
I'm curious about the redesign of urban public spaces with the reintegration of water into the city that you're speaking about. And I'm not at all familiar with the context of urban politics or neighborhood demographics or change in the urban areas of Netherlands. But I'm wondering if any of those projects to kind of revitalize public spaces or redesign public spaces, particularly if they were in places or neighborhoods that were seedier prior to, are attached to any processes of gentrification, or if there were contestations over those spaces by various groups, and now who are the users of these new public
I think
spaces?
far and away the best example of exactly what you're mentioning are those water squares that I showed you in Rotterdam. Because the first idea about where to put those water squares was in a neighborhood with a high proportion of immigrants. And the city never stopped to think, but there was a great protest from the neighborhood because they said, our children can't swim. We're not going to have these basins full of water in front of the front door where our children can fall in and drown. And I think for everyone that was an eye-opener because the Dutch have always taught their children to swim. There's water everywhere. Your children have to know how to swim. And the confrontation with the fact that there was a whole segment of the population for whom it wasn't self-evident that the children would learn to swim. It was quite a confrontation on both sides. And so they took this plan out of that neighborhood and moved it to this neighborhood, which is not a residential neighborhood. It's next to a school and a big office building, and there's some residential in the neighborhood, but it's more larger public buildings. And now it's turning out that this has really been a great source of, it brings a lot of visitors to this area, and it was just a very great, very big open plaza before. And now there are places to sit and chat and hang out and play basketball, and it's really become a place where people go even if they have nothing to do with the schools. And you see a lot of, I was there a couple months ago, and you see a lot of people just sitting around on benches, chatting. It's become like almost like a public park. There is an issue with it though now, and I think you see how the Dutch are still struggling within themselves. The one department of the city was very happy to build this exemplary project, and it's gone all over the world. It's been a great PR success. But when it comes down to actually the day-to-day management of it, the other departments of the city have been very negligent about cleaning it. So all this, plastic bags blow in and mud and twigs, and if you don't clean the place up, it starts to look pretty messy. So this has been a great source of frustration for the water people, that the municipal cleaning crews don't keep up with the idea behind the squares. And I think any future solution is going to have to deal with the brass tacks of day-to-day maintenance, and how you make sure that your governance structure not only gets these things built, but also keeps them maintained so that they work the way they're supposed to. Because there are too many plastic bags in those squares, the water won't go back into the ground table because the drains will get clogged. It's all very basic, but they're going to have to find a better governance understanding of not only how to make these places, but also how to make them work in the long run. Any other questions?
The flooding of the, where you saw that bridge, remember? You said there were the two levels,
Yes.
the streets. I'm thinking of Paris because along the Seine, that's what happens when the Seine floods, right? That one level they don't use, and they just use the higher one for cars and things. So it's really, a basic early philosophy that's just
Absolutely. The big mental leap was taking that from a river landscape into an urban, canal, as it were, and redesigning that space in a way that it can change character. We're so used to places just being the way they are and that's it. That they can change by season or by weather. That's.
and that makes a lot of sense for certain parts of Manhattan to do something like that.
Yeah, that was part of that was one of the suggestions in the Rebuild by Design team. I think it's called the Big U. And it's a big U around Lower Manhattan, and it's mainly about the coast of Manhattan, but it's also about stormwater management on the streets.
When there are these floods, how is the fresh water and the salt water be separated, or does that create problems for drinking water and everything else?
Not for the drinking water. The drinking water is taken mainly from the rivers and from areas in the south of the country. But you do see that climate change is affecting the quality of the water from which drinking water is made. That was, for me, one of the alarming things I heard during my research for this book, that one of the water companies that provides drinking water for Rotterdam, they take the water from the main river near Rotterdam. And there were already 11 days in that year, 11 out of 365 isn't a whole lot, but I thought it was really already too much, in which they couldn't take water from the river because it was either too salty or too muddy or too contaminated. And that, I mean, what will that be in 50 years? That's worrisome.
You showed a few different examples of creative designs for housing, but I didn't see any like houses on stilts like you see in island communities or even now more and more on both the east and west coasts of the U.S. Is that applied over there at all?
I only know of a couple examples. It's really rare.
Do you have any idea like why not?
I think because of the Dutch tradition, the tradition was keep the water out. And that meant that you wouldn't need any stilts because the reclaimed land or wherever you live would simply, by definition, always be dry. And now you see some floating housing like this, but I only know of one project where the houses are built on a sort of platform, and the tides go in and out and rise underneath that platform. But that's really the only example I know. So, we're done then. Thank you very much for joining me. I really,
You bet.
And I think your book is still going around somewhere out there. If anyone hasn't gotten to see it, there's a copy of the book floating around.
anyone here with Dutch roots, I was wondering? Well, you sort of.
In my heart.
Congratulations, it's very nice.
Thank you, Monsieur. It's such a fascinating subject, because it's very relevant for the Dutch, but it's becoming relevant for
Yes, thank you.
everyone, all over. Yeah, we're all having to do with too much water, too little water, flooding, drought, all over the world. So I just hope that these lessons inspire others, if only that.
Have you lived on a floating house?
No, I did visit these houses that I showed you, and they're actually very handsome.
So, but they're moored to stable land though, and they're just floating, but attached in a way, right?
The
The
whole-
bottom part is
Yeah.
on the water, but they're attached, so they're not floating away.
No, they don't float away.
Yeah.
They float, but they don't float away. They do have ballast underneath, and you have to be careful where you put your furniture so that it doesn't, your piano doesn't go sliding off to the other side of the room.
There is a system of counterbalances underneath it.
Yeah, yeah.
If you have a piano.
They have ballast tanks.
A bookcase, then you can
You're all
counterbalance.
caught up for you
Do you have a car?
I do.
after your visit last
And I'll give you my
Yeah,
card.
Okay.
Forgot about it.
Maybe we can.
I have a proposal, and maybe you can help me because you're a very learned person in academia, and I'm a teacher. My goal, like I said, is to learn the Dutch thing. So I was wondering if you know of anyone, or you in the future, of doing, I'm about like a year from retirement from my public school job. I don't know if I'm staying on 2 years or
So I'll
not.
see you Wednesday.
But,
from
If you or anyone you know in the Netherlands wants to do like an apartment exchange between New York and Amsterdam, I'm gonna give you my
Oh, okay.
So if you know someone.
The Dutch love New York, so.
And we love Amsterdam, so if you know of anyone or you in the future, I don't know how much you love me.
Okay. GlenPierrePedro@gmail.com.
Yeah, I
Is
took
that you?
a French name and then the Spanish one and it made an email address.
Oh, okay.
I teach
was just
French and
wondering if that was someone
Spanish.
else's card.
No, this is me.
Thank you.
My name's Glenn. It's Irish roots.
I'll see you again on the list. Oh, yeah,
Irish,
of course.
Polish, and Swedish.
Oh.
What a
Hopefully I'll see you
mixture.
on that soon. Hopefully I'll see you at.
Well, it was terrific. I loved it. I learned so much.
So, not forget all
Yours.
this.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Lynn. Thank you.
Back,
Thank you
right?
very
I think you
much.
should be able to, yeah.
Let me see, you gotta click here, I guess. Where does it says it is? Yeah, first close these.
No, right, okay, it doesn't want,
It doesn't like
doesn't let you
files.
go like that.
It doesn't like files to be open.
It's a great tour through the techniques and the adaptation, you know, again, thinking about Legos and
Yeah, it was,
the way in which,
yeah.
you know, I
What
mean,
was- how
first you have the British government, you know, and then you have the, you know, the post-colonial government, and they're just, you know, they're so biased towards serving the wealthy
Yes.
and the privileged
Yeah.
that, you know, there's none of that preventative work. I mean,
Mhm.
just like what you're
Mhm.
saying about the US, you know, there's none of that preventative work. And then when a crisis happens, again, you know, so they deal with the crisis, and then they're back. I mean, right now, in Lagos, they're taking sand out of the lagoon and building land, artificial land, to build a parallel city for the wealthy.
Really?
You know, which is
Like
the
the
worst thing you
seasteading
could
thing.
do in
Really?
terms of dealing with, you know, seawater rise. But that's, you know, so it's fascinating to see the adaptability that could be applied in a situation like that, that's not being applied.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks very much for that, you know, the inspiration.
Well, I hope so, yeah. It's, I don't wanna make it seem as if the Dutch have all the answers.
No,
That's why I also
no,
show their
yeah.
flooding and,
Yeah, yeah,
you know, they don't have it down pat by any means yet. But,
But it's nevertheless still interesting to see the way that, you know, the way in which adaptability or, you know, change, you know, like allowing the possibility of seawater
Yes,
rise.
exactly,
And,
yeah.
You know, it's a very different approach than saying the waters are already always on the outside.
we've solved it, it's out,
Right.
and just pump harder.
Right.
And that, as, you know, as everybody sees now with climate change, we have water coming from the sea, water coming from the rivers, water coming from the sky, and the subsidence, so the water coming up from the ground.
Right, but then her question about, you know, gentrification, of course, is
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, if you look at now some of the, you know, the propositions for what to do with the Gowanus Canal,
Mhm.
there's a lot of stuff about turning it into basically a floodplain, which it would have been originally.
Oh,
And ecological organizations are all behind that, but it means dispossessing all the people that live along there. And of course, we have a, you know, nasty history here in New York, you know, not just in New York, I mean, look at Katrina, of allowing, you know, poor people to
bear the brunt.
bear the brunt
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that type of.
And they're not interested in these so-called ecological solutions, they just see that they're losing their house and being kicked out again, and,
Well, but if they're being kicked out without being given any alternative
Of
place,
course,
they don't
yeah.
have the luxury
No,
of thinking about
no.
ecology.
and
So I
that
think
is
right now
really
here
a
we have
very
that
fundamental
opposition.
difference that,
It's either the environment or the people.
Yes. and in the Netherlands, it's, in that one sense, it's simpler because there is no socio-economic component to flood control.
Right, yeah,
It affects everybody.
right, yeah.
And it's not like New Orleans where the rich people, well, there is some of that the rich people lived on the high ground and the poor people lived on the low ground,
Right.
but nothing to the
So
extent
not
like
to
in the
the
US.
great disparities that you see in this case.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah,
So there's one less fraught thing about flood
right,
control in the Netherlands.
yeah.
Oopsies, I have my bag behind the lectern. Can you grab that for me?
Yeah, let's make sure you don't leave anything behind. Great, okay. So that's your only bag there?
Yeah.
Okay,
And
great.
the other one
I'll
was
make sure you don't end up leaving anything there. Well, thanks both of you for coming and
My
the book.
pleasure.
And, you know, let us know if you're coming back through with some new work that you want to share.
Okay,
You know,
yeah,
we're here
I'd
for
love to.
exactly that reason, so
Yeah.
be in touch.
And with the link to the stream?
So, as I said, well, I can send you a link that should allow you to download from, that's
Okay.
actually CUNY TV, so they're the ones who do this work for
Okay.
us. And that should be available right away, so if I forget to send it to you,
Great.
just remind me.
Okay.
And then eventually, that the student assistant will download that and embed it
Yeah.
onto our site, so then you can also link to that, which is
Yeah,
a
that
little
looks better.
prettier than the
Okay.
one that, but in the
Yeah.
meantime, if you want to download it, you should be able to do that.
Okay.
And it won't be the most beautiful, you know, it's shot by a machine, not by a person. And you'll want to know too that when you look at it, it may look horrible because it may focus on some weird place, but you can toggle between two positions there and there. So
Right.
probably it's going to be
I can stand there.
in some. I didn't want to interrupt your talk, but it's not vital. I think they'll hear you even if you're not in the image at all the time. Your images will be there.
Okay.
As long as you touch the toggle, because your first view may be
Empty microphone.
But know that there's a toggle there that you can do it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much,
enjoy the
Mary.
rest of your series of talks and
And
your trip.
give my warmest to Ashley
I
when he gets
will.
back up and running
I
again.
will.
Oh. Oh, good, it's only,
Dental
floss.
floss.
Yeah. Usually about.
There's a garbage can there.
Oh,